So, hi everybody, welcome to San Antonio Startup Week's discussion about esports. If you are new to the topic or kind of new to the scene that's happening in San Antonio, esports is about competitive gaming in the sense of video games, not so much tabletop or card games in the sense of like in person, but more digital and online. So we're going to be discussing some of the competitive scenes that are happening here in San Antonio and maybe even in the state of Texas or nationwide, and some of the upfront barriers that we're seeing or issues, and touch with some of our professionals here and some of our mastermind participants in order to kind of clarify on some of those things and see how we can move forward. So let's go ahead and start down the list. On my screen, I have Travis. So if you'll go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie. My name is Travis Yang. I'm the head esports coach here with A&M San Antonio, headed into our inaugural year of competition. Prior to coming down to San Antonio, I was working for about 2 years with Ashland University as their assistant esports coach. And then pretty much from 2010 to 2018, from my high school to end of college, I was running a professional StarCraft 2 team. So that was kind of where I got my hands-on experience, and that's transitioned now into collegiate. So I'm personally excited. I got down here to San Antonio at the end of January, so had a little bit of normalcy before things hit the fan, but nonetheless, been working and trying to get things ready for the semester.
Nice. And then I have Sam. You are next on the list.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Sam Elizondo. I'm co-owner of LFG Cyber Cafe. Realistically, just a driving force for gaming and esports in the city of San Antonio. Work a lot in the education space, as well as with veterans, building out, technological infrastructure for them as well, so that, they can participate in gaming and esports in the comfort of like VFWs and things like that.
And I have Will next.
Yeah, and Will Garrett. I run cybersecurity development for Port San Antonio. I guess for those that don't know, in Port San Antonio, it's a redevelopment authority that's working to redevelop what was Kelly Air Force Base, 100-year history here in San Antonio. And my focus largely on the cybersecurity and tech industries that we support on the campus. For the 5 or 6 years preceding me joining the Ports team, I ran an organization called Cybersecurity San Antonio that was a collaborative between the public sector and private sector to help foster the growth of that ecosystem in the region. Why am I here on an esports panel? At the Port, we're launching a multi-purpose technology arena that is custom built to host esports competitions, and we'll probably talk about that in a little bit. But a lot of our vision and strategic efforts kind of align what we're seeing around esports and gaming and the talent and the communities there to the industries we're trying to grow here in San Antonio.
Awesome. And I'm Stefanie. I have started working through my own company, Innovate Gaming, to help individuals who are moving into contracts as young adults, helping negotiate their placements and ensuring that they get paid for what they do through some of these larger companies. And then I myself actually lived through some of those contracts. So I definitely have had a taste of what it is to be a female in the gaming scene, and then to also play in a competitive background with League of Legends, and then also some of the MMO competitive scenes. So now that you've met us, you know what we do. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the scene here in San Antonio. We have been seeing a lot of what's going on in the surrounding cities with Houston and Dallas. And we as probably people that understand a little bit more about Overwatch on this panel, understand what's going on with some of the pro teams. But we also know that there are other competitive games out there that people are starting to move into, not only the US or the NA as a whole, but some of the sustainability around those games might not be so prevalent or known. So if we want to discuss some of the sustainable growth with some of these games, also kind of understanding what's going on with Tencent, and maybe if we've all heard about the changes happening politically with some of the ownerships of these games. So if we want to talk about the sustainability and growth in esports with San Antonio and Texas, we could all kind of touch base on that a bit. If we can just do it in order every time, or if we want to show hands. We're all gamers. How do we do this?
I can jump in and just start off about on sustainability.
That's awesome.
So my kind of general thoughts, and this is not necessarily an answer by any means, but sustainability in esports is kind of in an interesting spot right now, not only for Texas, but kind of across the globe. From the early 2000s up until maybe 2010, 2011, esports existed really essentially just as a grassroots thing. people would run their own events and people from the community would participate. It wasn't until, 2010, 2011, 2013, where we had modern esports like StarCraft 2, League of Legends kind of come in and dominate that space with developers backing their games, creating the funding and building out these tournament structures. And then as a result, bringing in sponsors and kind of formalizing the industry, which on one hand has been immensely positive and it's helped professionalize the entire scene. But kind of the issue we're starting to encounter is, these companies that have been brought in and are investing in esports, they need to get a return at some point. Now, obviously, they've come in and knowing that it's going to take some time. The thing that's up in the air in my mind is how early do they expect to get a return? How long are they willing to commit, before they, if they don't see what they're looking for before they bail out, or how long are they willing to stay in and invest? So that's kind of just another question on top of this existing topic that you just posed about sustainability.
Anybody want to add anything?
Well, and I can hop in, I guess, on what Travis talked about. I think two parts of it. Yeah, if you look at the business side of esports right now, especially the investment going in, there is a ton of money going into professional esports right now, from sponsors, from investors acquiring teams. I mean, it's hard to name a famous athlete or, entertainer right now that's not part of some investment group investing, in an Overwatch team or something like that. But outside of the top teams and performers in the world, there's very little money coming back out. So I think Travis brings up a great point in terms of long-term sustainability of the industry. And you can go look at a bunch of articles about, is there a bubble coming? It's like the tech bubble. Is there a bubble coming at some point for esports? Because it's the same type of trajectory. However, I'd counter that with, and I mentioned in my open, I think some of the global interest in esports and gamers outside the investment side of the house is for the talent that rests, that sits in those stadiums and, will pack Key Arena or Staples Center, Wells Fargo Arena, put 80,000 people in a stadium to watch a League of Legends North American Championship. It's how do they capture that talent, the talent in those brains, the IP developing those titles. And so I think there's this other line of intriguing growth that at least we're seeing from our perspective. And that's, the battle for talent, recruitment, retention of that talent. And there's this new dimension of esports that is providing an avenue for those from the corporate side to have a singular place they can go advertise to, recruit from, engage people around esports. So there hasn't been a lot studied or researched on that yet, but I think that's an intriguing growth that largely from my perspective, I've only seen the last handful of years as you've seen kind of esports explode. So I think that will be interesting to see how it plays out and whether, let's call it corporate America, at least just thinking about United States, gets involved in a heavy way in esports, and it may help to what Travis's point is, extend the willingness of investors to wait a little longer and see this foundation build a little bit stronger globally. So there's money coming out to complement what's going in.
Yeah, and there also needs to be an understanding of the talent itself. So every time we are typically talking about talent, we're talking about the pro players themselves and not the team behind them. And just the talent themselves in the sense of the pro players, they have a lot quicker turnaround than whenever we're talking about like physical sports. And so somebody who is 16 is likely going to retire by the time that they're 23 or 24. And so a lot of the times there's not really a hard understanding on that about what do you do with these players whenever they go into retirement? Do they become strategists or analysts or coaches, or, are they sitting here and trying to stay on a team long term? And is that going to help these investments go through? And so I think that the understanding of the timeline for a pro player needs to be understood in these things too. And it's not really hard to find. Like the players get it because as somebody who went through that, you feel your fall off, but you also feel the fall off on your investments. And so that's where some people kind of don't understand that. And I feel like that just is a part of what esports is that it's youthful in that way. Like you have to have that youthfulness into the pro players. But again, then we have to talk about what it is to have a staff behind them. And the technology that goes into all of it and having all of the stats for, these PCs and headgears and peripherals and all of that investment really has like a real asset turnover as well. So PCs. And
Stefanie, I'd have to add, I'm sure Sam has some amazing thoughts here, but based on what you were just talking about, I think it's fascinating to see the human performance side of esports And if you look at traditional sports and all the money that's been pumped in by the major brands, but the professional teams themselves, I go to the city we're speaking from today, San Antonio. You look at the Spurs. I mean, they knew exactly what minute of the game Tim Duncan's performance dropped off a cliff, and they were able to management. They were some of the first teams in the league to kind of understand human performance and the data analytics behind it. And you're seeing small groups, but backed by big companies, start doing the same thing right now. Like, how can we keep Stefanie at peak performance for 12 hours a day streaming on Twitch? And it's fascinating to see. You have a lot of the more traditional major sports leagues, at least here in the United States, that are starting to get behind esports. And I think that's the understanding you talked about in terms of what does a professional player look like? What do they need? What is behind them? And so it's fascinating to see that kind of shift. You even see some major hires pulled from professional teams here in the United States to go run certain aspects of some of the publishers' companies. And so that's a very interesting aspect there.
I think, Travis and Will did a really great job of kind of illustrating how the further esports gets, the more compounded the questions around it kind of become. Just as soon as it kind of solidifies itself with these big backers and the investment from the sports industry, now everyone's curious, well, what is the ROI and what are they actually getting out of it? Why are they doing it? I truly don't believe it's as flat as a monetary return on investment. I think there's a tremendous amount of data that you can pull from, all of these investments. They're not just looking at, expecting this specific player to start a clothing brand and then to take a portion of that profit. Oftentimes they're looking for the reach of that player, the reach of that organization, how they can manipulate that data or the people that follow it. So that's kind of the other caveat to esports is there's so much being done in the way of kind of doubling down your ROI and not just looking at the flat revenue, that there's other things at stake. And I think we as consumers, specifically as gamers, sometimes fail to realize that. A great example, there's that Netflix documentary that kind of talks about it. And it's, essentially if you're not paying for the service, you're the commodity. So it's, again, not necessarily as flat as, oh, well, they're going to get $100,000, every year for the next 10 years if they invest $1 million now or whatever. It's really how do we kind of leverage ourselves as community so that we continue to have these events and can continue to build esports, because I don't think you really get, your money straight back buying, JStorm. There's just such a quick turnover, not only in the players, but in the games themselves. How often is a new Call of Duty coming out? How often is, a new Battlefield coming out? Well, what's the new MOBA? So even the games in and of themselves expire relatively quickly. If you look at the timeline for traditional sports, basketball, football, all of these things have been played for years upon years. And, nobody's playing Modern Warfare 2 anymore competitively. I'm pretty sure that's gone. We might get a resurgence of Halo because they remastered it. But at the end of the day, you're kind of having to keep up with the times and the transition of tech as well. So, I think for San Antonio, it's just recognizing that there's value and getting behind it in the ways that we can. And I think, the board is doing a terrific job of that, of saying, like, we need an esports arena. We need to support this because they've already seen their value. They get that they're not going to get money directly back, but what they do want is that top talent. And ultimately, people that participate in esports, that's something that they're interested to. And that's a way to speak to them where they can't otherwise be spoken to.
And Sam, to put a point on what you just said for the viewers out here that are listening to Stefanie's intro on what the heck is esports, League of Legends World Championship in Korea last year had 100 million viewers. Last year's Super Bowl had 98 million viewers.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the reach of that audience and the people tuning in is critically important.
Yeah. And I think something to also add to that is the influence that comes with being one of those players. They are huge influencers for the tech scene, for the peripheral scene. Like essentially everything I have in front of me is because like C9 is a major part of what I enjoy in gaming. And this is everything that they use. So if I want to be a top performer, I should buy what they buy or what they're endorsed by. And so a lot of what I do and the way that I do my research is through a lot of what they're talking about on their end. So I think that that's also an investment. That's an asset to be an influencer and to have, 100,000 people just, tuning in to watch maybe, the top 15, 16 teams play. And there's somewhere between 5 to 7 people on each of those teams. Those are each huge influencers with hundreds of thousands of followers. And that is company deciding at times. Like Razer understood exactly what was happening as soon as it kicked off. Like they were just like, we got to back the top players and we got to back them hard so that they'll represent us. And now they're making billions just off of, sneaky saying, hey, I'm going to use their headsets through like C9, and hey, I got one on my head. So they got their money from me. But it's one of those things where, these guys, we want to be them. I aspire to be like them. And so they become a huge influencer for someone like me. And I know my friends are far more competitive. So it's one of those things where that's probably where you get an immediate turnaround, is where you find the great talent and then you put some endorsements on them. And it's amazing just how quickly that turnover happens on a couple hours of streaming. They can make a huge turnaround. But to kind of step aside from like the pro gamers, let's talk more about the other careers that can be found in esports. So these players are talented, don't get me wrong, but it takes a lot to get these guys in their prime. And it takes a lot to get them into tournaments and to get them marketed and to turn around what is essentially a brand for them. So if we can talk about some of the professional, well, I guess we can also talk about like some of the college careers that might be taken through this too. Not that I want to kind of push a traditional route. I think most of us in esports have probably self-taught and have like self-educated through Google and making our reach that way. So if we can talk about some of the careers and some of the paths, and whoever wants to go first.
For talking about like the other careers that surround esports?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have a great example sitting with us, Travis, Professor Yang, if you will. He that just the fact that Travis has found a career path where he can bestow his knowledge as a veteran gamer to younger athletes that may have a chance at scholarships and things like that is proof enough that, things are growing at an alarming rate. Because if we're saying that in 2013, esports really kind of kicked off, with Rick Fox's investment and things like that, to 7 years later, Professor Yang is sitting in front of us, responsible for 40 some odd students on multiple games. And that is his career. That's how he's making a living. I mean, the sky's the limit. Just from the education space, kind of doubling down and utilizing esports as a vessel, you start to really see, what NASIF talks about, the North American Scholastic Esports Federation. And it centers around the idea that, yes, at its core, there is the competitive play and there's the players. But if you look at any broadcast of an NFL game, any broadcast of an NBA game, all of the jobs that surround that are very much alive and well in the realm of esports as well, from the broadcasting portion to the media and the design, the marketing, the nutrition. Nutrition in esports is now a thing. They're trying to determine what best, vessel for caffeine or whatever stimulant to continue their performance, of course, legally. All of these career paths are now kind of transitioning to look at esports and figure out how they fit. My brother's a dietitian in Austin, and I had him try and do some research just to see, who's doing research on dietary needs for gamers. And he's like, I can't find any studies. There's a bunch of people that are, putting some up, but at the end of the day, nobody has hard data. So, I mean, we're talking about from the biological level. And I think that is what's so fascinating about, esports being the Wild West, is you have all of these heads now, all of these professionals, all of these people that are passionate about esports, trying to figure out how best to utilize what they know to, reap the benefits of something that they're passionate about. And again, Will being a great representation of that.
I'll chime in here real quick. First of all, I'm not a professor, just for full transparency's sake.
You are known to us as Professor Yang.
I have a bachelor's degree in sport management. That is the extent of my formal education.
I expect a Twitter handle change. Just saying.
Well, we'll talk about that after. But that being said, something Sam touched on, looking at esports, participants compared to traditional sports participants, right? When we look at the route they go through from high school to collegiate and then the professional, right? That transition from collegiate to professional, realistically across all of the major traditional sports, you're looking at most, a 1% turnaround there in terms of players that actually manage to compete in some professional capacity. For most sports, it's actually much less than 1%. But that being said, it doesn't mean that all those years of experience you spent playing your sport are just out the window, right? Ideally, if you followed that collegiate route, at least now you've got a degree And each of one of those sports has an entire industry, right? We see a lot of the commentators and people who do marketing and people who write articles. They may not necessarily have been a professional player, but they have those experiences and they can take their knowledge and write about it or coach about it, things like that. And now esports obviously still quite a few years behind that structure, but I could definitely see in maybe 5 or 6 years, it actually start to be formalized enough to kind of mimic that model that, say, the NCAA has in place right now, where students are going to college, getting an education, and then there's some kind of collaboration or system set up with professional teams in each of their games, and maybe even some kind of draft system. Now, of course, this is none of this is even close to being formalized, but that's kind of the path I would envision going into the future.
Yeah, and I would add, I kind of like three thoughts on it. And Sam mentioned one of them, fascinated between this kind of, merging of traditional sports to esports and the career fields that are opening there, and people that are and taking skill sets they've learned largely around human performance and marketing and sales and, tickets and how do you attract a consumer to watch. And then I don't know if we want to get into it now, Stefanie. I think the ability, and it's less about jobs within esports, but it's those, to Travis's point, 1%, the 99% that have a mind for this, that are gamers, that maybe been playing video games for 20 years. Maybe they never made it anywhere professionally. They're not on Travis's team. There are a lot of employers out there across almost every vertical I can come up with in industry that are looking for that talent. We have some great examples on our campus and have done some conversations here locally with them in the past where, just because you're a gamer, do you normally look at an artificial intelligence robotics company? Well, probably not, but I guarantee that company's trying to find you. And so there's this transition of people with that mindset and passion in esports and gaming. And there's really a lack of education, I think, right now, and communication in the marketplace. And I know the three of you, Sam and Stefanie, especially here in San Antonio, and how long you've been doing it. Esports and the gaming community here is grassroots. There's not an easy button you can click online to tap into that market. And so I think that's maybe something we could talk about in more detail in terms of, opportunities here. And then the third piece, because of the nature of San Antonio Startup Week or Startup Month, it's also interesting to see the entrepreneur angle that's coming into esports because of the explosive growth. Like any market that's disrupted, you have a lot of opportunities for maybe those that have played in, traditional tech to make a change. Twitch wasn't around 15 years ago, and the need for streaming or the need for, someone to challenge Logitech or Razer, HyperX, and how can you improve on it? And so I think there's this fascinating opportunity in an industry that's growing and money is getting pumped in on the entrepreneur side of the house. But that really takes an understanding, like any startup, the customer discovery process, go do your 100 interviews. And so I think there's also this opportunity in San Antonio for this panel to help maybe highlight the opportunity for entrepreneurs in San Antonio to figure out how do they connect with the esports community and develop things that will not only benefit the local community, but may have a more wide-reaching impact on the gaming community writ large.
Yeah, I think culturally there's an acceptance issue as well. So I think that is something that we kind of see in San Antonio where things are very traditional. We have the whole, kids go to college, don't really care if you're good at video games, it's not going to pay the bills. And nowadays it can pay the bills. And I think that there is just an educational piece there too, where culturally we have to start accepting it a little bit more, as it's not just a pastime, it's also something you can be good at and make a living off of. And so this also goes to the side jobs as well, where it's like, of the times that I was in tournaments, the people that handled the marketing, that handled the photography, that handled the graphics, that handled the video, that handled, the printing of the jerseys, all of these things are very specific and they're done very well. Yeah, they're done specifically so that they can target out audience. And if you get to a point where you've been a part of the gaming scene and you're good at this and you know what people are looking for, you've seen the advertisements, you can self-teach a lot of that. And if you just take a marketing class on the side of it, you'll probably be in demand for these sorts of things. But I do see what you're saying about being grassroots, and it is very hard to get into the scenes here. It's hard to get into it in the NA in general because of the acceptance issue, I think. Because you see things in Asia and you see things in Europe where they have these boards that are made for these sorts of things just across their countries, where it's like, hey, you want to be a part of our esports teams? We're going to stand behind them. We're going to root for them. And it starts to become, the Dallas Cowboys has all this backing with the entire state. Why aren't we backing, the Dallas Fuel? Why aren't we backing Houston Outlaws? Why aren't we like really coming together to say we're rooting for our team? Because not only would it help them as players and their mentality and the entire team that's working behind them, but it would be, something that comes together to bridge these careers that these guys and girls are really kind of putting their lives into to kind of drive forward. And I think as a country, we really just don't stand behind that. And even more so when we come somewhere down south. I mean, in California, this is probably more accepted, but you come here to San Antonio and we got a lot of dirt and not so much technology. So, but that's another thing too. There's a lot of opportunity for infrastructure. And I think that's where there's a lot of investment going now, is that we are seeing some infrastructure finally moving in with how the city is handling conventions. When we got PAX and San Japan putting on big gaming pieces, we got the port. Like, hello, you guys probably had to put in so much infrastructure and so much investment to make that happen. And that is like pride and joy right here. Like, I feel it, and the other gamers feel it too. And so I think we need to not only think about opportunity for jobs, but also opportunity for people to get involved and like help out and put on some events, do some stuff. So, and that's a great way to get experience on a resume. Volunteer, do some stuff with, PAX, help out with San Japan, help out with, the small gaming tournaments around here. There's so much that you can learn just from volunteering. It's unreal how much I got from doing that sort of stuff. Even online, when I was like, hey, I'm going to teach myself how to do some graphics. They were ugly, but now they're a lot better. So if we want to talk about maybe some opportunities that we already know of in the state of Texas as a whole, I know San Antonio is a little more niche, but if there are those opportunities, we can discuss that. We can talk about opportunities for talent in pro gaming, or talk about opportunities for the support staffing and marketing and tech. Do we know of any way that people can get involved if they're not already? Good talk.
Over to you, Sam.
Yeah, how do people get involved? Locally, it's a little more difficult. I think, for being the owner of LFG Cyber Cafe, for 7 years before we had reopened, there was no venue like ours that really supported PC gaming as a whole. So we're pretty far behind like Houston and Dallas and all of these bigger cities that have esports or that have traditional sports organizations that are investing money, or that have, people that are doing the philanthropy to grow it locally because they see the value. It's just now that, organizations like the Port are saying like, okay, it's us. Like, we're going to be the guys, we're going to take the first step. So to be involved locally, I mean, definitely at the collegiate level, you have Schreiner University, you have Texas A&M San Antonio, University of Incarnate Word, you have St. Mary's and Trinity, right, Travis? I think those are all of our colleges that have like a real esports program of some form or fashion. UTSA has a tremendous gaming club. I think those are great ways to get involved with some of the people that are decision makers or that are driving esports as a whole, because we have so many colleges. Obviously, I've done some work with the VFW as well. So VFW Post 8541, we built a LAN center into them to kind of reach out to younger veterans and give them a place to be and something familiar to them that isn't just, a cantina or something like that. So if you're military looking that way, you also have, the USAF Gaming, United States Air Force Gaming. They have their own organization now that is supported by the U.S. Air Force. Being Military City USA, I have to assume that there's going to be a lot of veterans that are going to watch this as well. And that's a great way to get involved. And then just watching, being a part of spreading the word for local events. I think, similar to voting, sometimes we forget the power of our voice and the power of our own social media assets. So when you see somebody that is trying to do something for a community, dude, just liking it and retweeting it, or, sending them a note saying, hey, I appreciate what you're doing, will do a tremendous amount for growing our local organizations and our local events, because that's what it takes. I mean, it's hard to find investors and people that are willing to put their money up if we can't prove to them that there's an audience. And it's very hard to prove that there's an audience if nobody's willing to say that they'd be a part of that audience. And I see that as kind of a trend as well. There's this reluctance to just support. Like, even if you're not going to go to the event, if you like gaming and you like esports, supporting those people that are driving it, specifically Travis, I see him all the time on Twitter and I try and give him a like every single time they do something, win or lose. No, I'm behind you guys. So I would start there and look for the people that are investing. If you like the idea of having an esports arena in San Antonio and Will Garrett and the Port and his team are building one and you're looking for a job, I mean, hey, that's a great place to start because he's already telling you, that he's looking for you essentially. I know that Guadalupe Valley Telecommunications Company is an ally of ours. They've done some consulting or asked me to do some consulting for them and are going to start building out events and things like that. So just pay attention to the local environment. And if you see somebody that, is new and you're either looking to support that event or you're interested in an idea of an employment, it never hurts to reach out. So definitely just taking that first step and either liking the event or reaching out to them and saying like, hey, I love what you guys are doing. How can I be a part of that? I think is a great way to start.
Just to throw on there on what Sam said there, getting in at the entry level, whether it be as a volunteer or just an entry level paid position. For me, when I was a freshman in college, this job that I'm in now literally didn't exist, right? That's just the pace of which things are moving. It's been that way for tech, but as Will commented, esports falls kind of under the same trend there. So if you can get in, get your foot in the door and start working, you can kind of build your own position, right? Obviously, you got to put in the work and you got to show your worth. But that's kind of how the industry is right now. A lot of these companies, they know they want to support and they want to, get into esports or gaming, but they don't know exactly, what kind of position they're looking for because they don't really exist. There's not really a set model for who, what type of person they're looking for, what qualifications they need. So if you can go in there and kind of show your value and help set those standards and set those qualifications, and that helps the community, that helps the scene as a whole as well.
Yeah, and I think, Stefanie, you brought up a lot when you compare us to other cities in Texas, or you just look at other markets, or you Google top cities in the United States for gaming or esports. I have a theory that San Antonio is at a tipping point. That may not be tomorrow, but sometime where you have enough coalescing and out of the gaming community itself to the broader community. This panel is a great example that's going to touch, by and large, a heavy downtown tech scene, startup community in San Antonio that may not know, the size of the community here. And then if you look at the data, and I'm not talking about the data that you can pull, online from some internet survey, but you really dig into people that look at the data. San Antonio has a massive gaming community. In what are metrics that would matter to me as an investor or someone looking to get into the space, and it's everything from the household massive multiplayer games purchase. San Antonio is ranking way above where I guarantee our audience would think they would nationally. Part of the challenge is outside of Sam's blood, sweat, and tears for the last 2 decades, we don't have a lot of infrastructure in place. And I say that lovingly to Sam because Sam had, by and large, a place that a lot of us could point to. Like, yeah, go to Sam and LG Cyber Cafe. And Sam would probably say, heck no, Will, but we need 10 other Sams. Or we need Sam to be 10 times as large. But that's okay. I think it's those building blocks. We're proud of what we're doing at the Port. We're doing it to be an asset and part of the local gaming community, not a competitor to anyone. We want to be an integral part that's helping everything from the career track to the professional player track to the employers looking to tap into that audience. But I truly think San Antonio, we might not have had the professional sports owners or venture that was backing this early on. I also think that tipping point aligns with the shift. COVID hasn't helped it, but publishers recognizing that, all of our teams can't sit in California and yet be based in New York or Houston or wherever it may be. You look at New York Excelsior, when they do a pop-up shop in Brooklyn, there's a line out the door around the block for 3 straight days. And yet that team's, based in LA. And so there's this shift, just like professional sports, of we have to have teams in the local markets. And I think for San Antonio, at least the optimist in me talking, the Spurs is our one example. We love our home team. And so when we get to a point, whether professional sports driven or venture backed, and we have a professional team here, I think there's some components that are coming in the next year or two that will really help from an infrastructure side, an excitement side, a coalescing of the gaming community. And I don't say coalescing, I know the gaming community is here very coalesced with the rest of San Antonio, so that it's easier to plug in, support, And so I'm excited for kind of the future outlook of what we see in the opportunity for our community.
Okay, well, that is the first and last time that we're blowing up his ego. All right. Sam's ego already doesn't fit on the screen. We don't need to say we need 10 more of him. Okay.
Why? Or just, do you want 10 more of me or me 10 times? You want to fight 100 ducks or ducks horse? Which one? Which one? Which one do you want?
I don't. Can we avoid all of that? I think what I would like to add to that is that we very much talked about this from an individual standpoint, but I think this also goes for the entrepreneurs that maybe have a small team and are trying to get into esports or get into the whole startup piece and the entrepreneurship that is around technology. You're in the right city for it. I think that if you were to go deal with Silicon Valley and have your ideas, it would just be a constant competition, and it would be head-butting and money needing, and it would just be anger all the time. But here in San Antonio, we are very open-minded to the idea of, you know, rising tide, all ships. So let's like work on that as a team. And so I think that if you're going to try and approach entrepreneurship in esports, you're in the right place. Now it's about you activating on your time and the way and how and the people that you talk to. And so this is a great place to start that discussion. Clearly, you're at a startup week event. So esports and the people that are coming to this talk are the people that you want to start talking to because they're clearly just as interested as you are. And to have the people that are in this call to already kind of be one of those standing points and maybe even the conventions that come into town for gaming, all of those things are great places to start learning and to start validating. Please validate your ideas before you put them out into the esports realm because they will get shot down real quick by the rest of the community that is not based in San Antonio. And that sucks. And if you're not used to trolls, get ready. So I would say that don't be scared to just jump and do it, but do it here first and do it with us and do it with the community in San Antonio because we are going to be the ones that are really excited to see anybody succeed at this point with esports in our city. And the way that it's kind of collaborating with Houston, Dallas, Austin is not the greatest right now. So to see those things kind of breaking out and becoming bigger pieces where we can start to work with the entire state and bring in that talent. We have so many universities. How do we not have like a well-known esports person out of here yet? Like what the?
We have Professor Yang with us today. Did you forget?
I'm sorry. He's awfully quiet.
Well, I will be his voice so that you don't forget.
You're really pretty, Professor Yang. I'll get a little logo of you on a shirt and remember who you are. Yeah. So I think if you are trying to get into the startup scene, do it. Please do it. God, do it. Talk to Yang. Do it.
In terms of infrastructure, I just want to add a note. I think a lot of people forget that San Antonio is a great host city for things. So it's going to be one of those shifts again, you know, where we see where we saw esports explode. I think it'll explode the very same way in San Antonio. I know that they have that event center up in Arlington that was totally geared towards esports, and they really doubled down. But I don't think they can provide the same infrastructure and the same hospitality that a city like ours can. So that's, you know, another huge driving factor. We have PAX in our backyard, and that still hasn't, you know, truly been embraced, in my opinion. I talk to gamers all the time in my store, you know, veteran gamers that I come across doing the veteran thing. And, you know, I ask them like, hey, have you ever been to PAX? And people still say no. So there's something to be said for like our you know, lack of communication, I think, within the community for things like that to be infinitely more successful. Because I'd like to see like Nintendo back at our PAX. I'd like to see Microsoft back at our PAX. And they don't come down here because we, again, don't have, you know, the attendance. So it's really important that you invite your friends, you retweet, and remember that we could grow this on our own accord. We've been doing it long enough. And it's very soon, it's going to be much bigger than we realize because of what we can offer. I mean, even from the standpoint of cost of living, like as soon as people realize that they can live in San Antonio for a fraction of the cost of California and then just send their team to the event for a plane ticket, like Texas is going to be busy. I think it's just a matter of time, really and truly.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Well, we are kind of coming up on time here. So do we have any any additional points that we all want to add in before we take a leave?
Did we hit all the questions?
We did not hit all of the questions. I'm going to be real with you right now, Sam. We did not, because we talked too much.
This is fine. I blame
That's
Professor Yang.
Okay, well, so we can touch on it. So one of the questions that we didn't hit yet is about minorities and women in gaming. We don't really see it a whole lot. Now, I don't want to like master race this whole thing, but we kind of see a whole lot of Europeans and we see a whole lot of Asian. And we don't really see many, I mean, Afro-Moo, I love you. But like, where are the Black players? Where are Hispanics? Where is the market for these things? And why aren't they a part of it? And then we also see these female pro gamers that just about break the scene, and the toxicity in a community leads to suicide. And so for the major ones that I have seen in the League of Legends and Dota scene, those female pro players are no longer with us. And that to me is a very scary thing for the youth going into this. Those are two topics. So we can talk about minorities, and then we can also talk about women.
Oh, they're very good.
And the combination of the two if necessary. So
I think we should, because it's there. I assume they're going to edit this anyway, because
Okay.
Hopefully they don't, reference me.
So I
calling
can just start
Travis
cussing like
Professor
crazy?
Yang. I'm just kidding.
Assume. Look, we just talked about toxicity. I'll try and
we may
reel it
very
in.
well not be edited, but I think we should answer all of these questions for Dax, and then he can play Choose Your Own Adventure and cut it up however he wants.
Do you remember those Goosebump books? They were good.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. They
were very
Now
good.
they have Choose Your Own Adventure Netflix series for kids. I don't know if you know that, but that's a wild ride.
My childhood sucked, apparently. Things are way cooler now.
True.
Anyways, I got video games.
Yes. So who wants to levy those questions first? Travis?
I'll just start it off.
Thank you, Travis.
As I do. There's that quote, I think, is, the best time to plant a tree is 100 years ago, and then the next best time is, like today. I think in particular with women in gaming, one big issue for many years, and still to this day, one of the biggest is just the stigma. Girls in gaming, even now, girls who actually hop into games, they get verbally berated, they get, trolled, they get et cetera, it just goes on and on. I think it has slowly started to get better in these past 2-3 years since esports has become slightly more professionalized. But I think an unfortunate reality is for women who are seeing success now, and the few women who have made it to kind of that main stage, they did so because they stuck through it, they grinded, they put in the work that was necessary. But a lot of girls, they may have been interested in gaming at some point early on in their lives, but they gave it up because, they're like, hey, I'm not having fun. People are just, making me feel uncomfortable, et cetera, et cetera. So I think a lot of the work that needs to be done now, so that these future generations coming up in elementary school and middle school, they can have a much better experience and a much more, just a much healthier environment to pursue, if gaming is their pursuit of choice.
Yeah. Coming from the standpoint of like my store, when I used to my business partner, Martin Cruzy, I used to work for him when I was in high school. That's kind of how we got to this whole LAN Center thing, because he owned one. He owned Extreme Gaming. And that was 100% a dungeon for the boys. You did not see a woman in there. You did not see a girl in there. If she walked in, she immediately turned around and left and was like, this is not for me. So I've got to see like the evolution of that. And, at LFG, we've made it very clear that this is a family-friendly environment and anybody is welcome to participate from any walk of life, shapes, color, creed, does not matter. And we now get to see like the benefits of esports becoming more normalized. And I remember it like it was yesterday. It was 3 months ago and 2 days. I had a group of girls walk in. There was 4 of them, all under the age of probably like 15, 16. And they were coming in as a troop of girls to go play video games together. I had never seen anything like that in the entirety of my time working one or owning a LAN center. And to me, like, that was a very pivotal moment that they felt comfortable enough in my establishment to come do that. But beyond that, they had found a clique of other girls that played games, and they wanted to go do it publicly. And I think that's, important. And I've also got to see the transition of what it's like to be in a game lobby with a girl, talking about the berating. Like, I can very vividly remember, playing Modern Warfare, the original, and hearing a girl and like everybody's losing their mind. Like, this is a unicorn. Why is there a girl playing our Call of Duty, right? Like, it's the boys club. And that's what they would do. I mean, exactly what you're talking about. And I see a little bit of the opposite. I think we're kind of turning it over where, yeah, like younger kids may get really excited that there's a girl in the lobby, but there is a tonality from the male standpoint where there's sometimes a protector. Somebody be like, yo, like relax, like just mute them. Like, let's just play this game. Let's just focus on the objective, because girls are now getting introduced to video games much sooner. So they're playing at higher levels. They're being introduced to, you know, FPS with their parents when they're 5, 6, 7, 8, and they're building up the skill set, which used to be really the only deterrent before them playing at a professional level was how early were they introduced, because there's nothing to stop a girl in esports, physically or otherwise, from being just as good as the boys. And that's the beautiful part, is there is no physical limitation. So the only limitation, unfortunately, is those that surround it, you know, doing exactly what Stefanie is talking about. And I'm sure she's, you know, unfortunately experienced that. So I think it's growing, and it's all of our jobs to ensure, you know, if we are in a lobby, not to go overboard, but to make sure that it stays in the game. Because if you're playing a game and somebody's in the lobby with you, you're probably all playing for the same reason, and that's to win the match. And you don't win matches by carrying on, you know, a 30-minute long tirade about a girl and what she does and what she's wearing and why she's here and why she's playing that character, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think, one, it comes to me for, like, back to some things Sam, you and Stefanie have tossed out, like, what can we do locally? And so I can't comment specifically on being a female in esports, and Stefanie, you can, and to Sam's point,
Maybe.
and unfortunately you probably experienced it, but I go to just big tech in general and the very well-known issues that exist for females in tech. And at least when I drill it down to a local level here, and something I've been involved in for years, is Cyber Patriot. And so it'd be like gaming competition, but for people interested in cybersecurity in middle school and high school level. And, you know, San Antonio went over the course of 12 years from no teams out of the middle and high schools to the most of any city in the country. We've won the national championship. But it was really a focus by the corporate sector to celebrate very specifically the females in Cyber Patriot. And there's a lot of discussion on how you do that and how do you not make it different than the males. But the truth is, we wanted to celebrate the best all-female team. And it encouraged all-female teams. And frankly, a lot of times they're being the male teams. And so that's a micro example, but it's a recognition, I think, from the broader tech industry on we've got to foster it. We've got to hold up people like you, Stefanie, frankly. We've got to hold up the people, the gamers in our community, to the younger girls that are interested in getting forward. I think big tech, at least in the United States, has done a fairly good job of that. I'm not talking about looking at the composition of leadership teams, but in terms of celebrating those leaders on the female side that are the CEO of those companies. And I think we need to do better on that here. But I also think, to the tipping point analogy, we're at the point now where we have the opportunity with a more visible gaming community, things going on that haven't been the past couple of years, where it's an exciting time, but it's also a time where I think there's gonna be a lot of people that have never played a video game getting involved in this, that need to understand that there's some real challenges. But I think most of San Antonio thinks about those as opportunities, not challenges.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I would put out there is that we all kind of pick up a game for the first time and we suck at it, and we keep playing it because our friends are playing it. And then we keep playing it because it becomes fun. What are friends? Is that what you just asked, Sam?
No, I said not me. I'm the best at all video games.
Well, okay. Yeah, sure. I've seen. And I think from there, like, whenever we kind of get to that point where a video game goes from like being fun to, wait a minute, I'm really good at this. Hold on. I'm better at than other people at this. There becomes that transition in mindset, and either you're competitive or you're not. Like, I kind of get that. But if you kind of find yourself in that space and you're a female, you get a lot of pushback really quickly. And it can either break you or harden you. And really, it shouldn't do either of those things. And I think one of the best ways to not go down that path, as somebody who did, is to play with other girls and other women that are in that scene with you. And they're going to be hard to find because they've already been hardened or broken. And so there are communities on Facebook, on Discord, in Reddit, where you can find people like yourself. And this is for minorities as well. You can find people like-minded and like you that are going through the same stuff and having to deal with the toxic communities until these gaming companies can figure out how to manage it better. And while I do want to put a little bit of blame on those companies for how they've managed these things, or even social media for how they haven't really shut down the bullying side of this, but reach out to the communities that are going to be good to you. And I'm going to tell you right now, the White Knights are going to get called simps, but they're the best ones to keep around, baby girls. So they are probably good at the game if you're playing with them at that point. And if they are good at the game and they're treating you with respect, they're worth keeping around. It's a real good feeling whenever you do a team tryout and you get sexually harassed and then you turn around and kick the crap out of that team in that same tournament. So don't put up with that crap because you think you need them. Baby girl, they need you. You think differently than the boys. And I think when I understand that physically, we may not have any sort of like, that's not a part of esports, but we do think about games differently. And that can be a make or break on a team. As somebody who is a shot caller or somebody who has helped run and manage teams, you have a talent that will be slightly different from the boys. And it's up to you to utilize it and make it a very special tool. Because if you go into pro gaming, awesome. And if you don't, you will always go into the art scene and into the marketing scene and into the copy and the content scene differently than they will. And you will be seen differently than they are. And that is something to hold with power, not to diminish in any way. And that is what these groups are made for, is to remind you that you are talented and that you have something different that is worth wielding instead of hiding. So step forward, become one of us, be a warrior, something like that. See, I get all like powerful on speech and then I kill it. What were you going to say?
I love it.
No, that was great. I was just going to say on the minority side, because that was also, the other side of the question. Just in my personal experiences, having come down from Ohio, Ashland, Ohio, Northeast Ohio, near Cleveland, down here now to San Antonio. When I was in Ohio and we were recruiting kids, granted it was for a private institution, so we're already dealing with a different population, but these are all kids, they grew up with computers, they knew what esports was, they were already either competing or, they'd been gaming for a long time. They never usually had issues with getting the hardware they needed. Coming down here to Southside San Antonio, where the majority of the population of the students on our campus are come from underrepresented populations, and as a result, we see the same reflection on the esports team. A lot of these kids, when I was trying to run tryouts in the summer, I'd be like, hey, we're gonna just do the tryout. And they'd be like, well, hey coach, I don't have a computer. Like I don't have a gaming computer. And I was like, oh, I didn't even, thought it hadn't even crossed my mind. Or they're like, I play Overwatch, but I play on console. The majority of our players came from console, which is not necessarily a good or bad thing, but that was definitely something different than I had come in expecting. Fortunately, through the money that the university invested, we do have the pieces available, and we have a space. It's available 24/7, and I encourage them to use it, with stable internet and everything. But so a barrier in that sense, in terms of access to just the gear that's needed to even compete. And as we go forward and esports grows, we are seeing more of a transition into PCs. I think Call of Duty, Cold War, their next game coming out in the spring, for their professional level circuit, it's switching over to PCs. Granted, you still have to use a controller, but it's going to be in PCs as opposed to console. So that's a major shift in one of the biggest games of biggest franchises of all time. So as that continues to go that route, hopefully developers keep that in mind, or the supporters of esports, because that is going to become a much bigger barrier if it's not addressed. Yeah.
The digital divide, I think, is real, regardless of what you're talking about in tech, right? I'm sure that has a lot to do with the same reason, the port may not see as many minority developers, or whatever the case may be. And I don't know if that's tied specifically to household revenue, but anybody can quote a PC versus the cost of a console and determine pretty plainly, like, there's a big disparity between the two. And if you're talking about practicing something at the professional level, and you're talking about the difference between a 240 hertz display on a PC and a 60 hertz display on a console, I mean, we're talking about playing with your glasses on and playing with your glasses off almost. There's an entirely different feel to that. And you're seeing it. I think, when it comes to like FGC communities and some of the console communities, there is significantly more minorities represented there. And yeah, you might absolutely be right that it's due to the cost of buying into a PC and a wage gap. I can't really comment on it because I've never looked it up. But that doesn't mean that they're any less capable. And there's this really cool story about this small community in India that was practicing Street Fighter. And I think it was Street Fighter on, I think when I want to say it was like Street Fighter 4, maybe 3. Long story short, it was the only thing that this community played. All of the kids played Street Fighter, and that is all they played all the time. Their LAN centers, like mine, was only Street Fighter. They would go every day, and they were competing against themselves in like this hyperbolic time chamber, just like, you know, from like Dragon Ball Z, right? Like they lived, they breathed, and they died Street Fighter. And somebody randomly came across this community that happened to, you know, be involved in esports and saw these kids feverishly playing this game, and then brought one of them out to the actual national scene, and he tore through everybody. I mean, absolutely dismembering the brackets. Nobody saw this coming, and it was because he just found something that they loved and found a community that, you know, they could participate in. And I think that still exists. Like, there may be a gap from the PC side, but knowing that, you know, there's places like the Port that's going to have a 24/7, you know, LAN center, or LFG that is reasonably priced, and there's a way for you to participate, even if it just comes from the standpoint of watching the games. You can learn so much from most of these games by watching your content creators and your YouTubers. So, you know, I would just say, like, find a place that you can do it. You may not be able to do it right now, but that doesn't mean that you can't be involved, and that doesn't mean that you can't practice. And that doesn't mean that just because you have, you know, one leg behind, that you can't literally be the best, because we saw that coming out of that little tiny, you know, city in India.
And I would add just 2 quick things. I think on the infrastructure side, the digital divide, San Antonio broadband capabilities, it's a real challenge for, if we're just talking esports and gaming. I mean, talk about it being a challenge writ large for education and pathways. But I think whether it's what Sam's doing with LFG, whether the group Travis is a part of growing academic programs that provide these kids a place they can go play, what we're doing, I think those are things that our community needs. It does need more infrastructure, and even the appropriate amount of bandwidth. The kid might, you know, have the greatest PC in the world, but be sitting at home running the slowest amount of bandwidth. And so I'm excited to see, I mean, obviously I'm passionate and excited about what we're doing at the Port, but collectively as a community, some of the additional infrastructure coming online. And then the one other group I thought that we talked about women, we talked about minorities, I think veterans. Sam mentioned what LFG is doing with the VFW is exciting. He could go into a lot more detail about it, but tapping into a younger veteran pool. And we see a lot of it at the Port. You know, one of the major military partners we have down there is Air Force Cyber Command. And that is a different type of stress than you think about, you know, the soldier on the battlefield, downrange, someone that's sitting behind a computer 18 hours a day and doing, you know, what they refer to as non-kinetic warfare and having real effects on people around the world. And there is this kind of global network of airmen, and Air Force Gaming has now been formalized and is headquartered here at Lackland. And it's less about the recruiting side. That's a good or bad thing. The Army has been running their esports program very specifically designed at recruiting. And they have at least this past year, a big presence at PAX here. But it's exciting to see what AFG is doing, what LFG is doing, of tapping into those veteran, where for them gaming is an outlet to deal with more psychological issues. And I think that's something important, because I actually know a lot of military members that tune into Startup Week activities just interested in what's going on, that there are resources and people here in the community that are very specific and understand, it's not me, but that have served in the military, that are doing things to support veterans or active duty members. I think that's a unique aspect of what will grow in San Antonio's gaming community, is really bringing the military presence in a more significant way than you see in other major U.S. cities.
Sweet.
I think another topic that we can touch on, just as like our final bit here, would be not just esports in the sense of console and PC, but also talking about it for mobile and VR and where it might be going. I understand VR is typically tied to a console or PC, but it's always kind of put into its own category whenever you discuss it. And so I feel like a lot of as we were talking about, like with veterans and whatnot, there are a lot of VR programs that are going on now around some of that, if we wanted to discuss that. And then mobile gaming is now taking off with tournaments, and highly paid tournaments at that, i.e. Pokemon. Holy cow, they had a huge payout this year. And then we also have some of the mobile setups that are happening at, actually, I think all of the did all of the packs do a mobile
I've only
game
had
or a
good-
mobile setup
only
where
good
it was
interactions
like
with
on
Sam.
scene, but it was like a scavenger hunt kind of
I
thing
say
that
it
also
every
got
time.
paid out, but it was like they tournamented it somehow?
I have
Scratch
no idea.
that. Whoever's editing it, remove that. But mobile gaming is now.
Leave it in. I'll give you $10.
Oh God, $10. That's all I'm worth to you.
Thanks. eSports.
So mobile gaming. I don't really participate in it.
All one word.
Some of my
actually.
friends do. Friends, what are those?
Are we talking about like both? Like,
Yeah.
I guess I think innately we all probably. I don't know what Will plays. I might be able to guess, but are we just talking about playing a game on your phone, or are we talking about like mobile esports? Because those are two
mobile
entirely.
esports.
Oh yeah, no. Man, maybe I'm an elitist or too old or something, but watching that is the least.
I don't do it either.
entertaining thing I've ever seen.
I know it exists, and I know it's kind of like people mix it in with the esports discussions. I understand that there are tournaments around it, money to be earned. I understand there's pro players in those scenes. I don't know anything about it though.
Huge in like Southeast Asia because of infrastructure.
Mhm.
Like huge, like PUBG, Southeast Asia. That's like almost soccer. But I think a lot of it depends on what's available because you see like they're rallying around what they have. So I mean, they had it at DreamHack and there was a laundry list of kids sitting up on a thing, looking at their phones, and people were talking about it and they were capturing the gameplay. But in terms of like its feasibility, I mean, and this is just my opinion, it's like, you know, PC esports, console esports, some other stuff, and then maybe mobile. I don't know.
I feel like that's how it is in the NA. Like I would agree with that structurally wise, like where its important lies or like how much influence it has. So yeah, I know that there are people that are trying to create mobile games and whatnot in San Antonio to try and like break into those scenes. We are not trying to diminish you if you are watching this. We very much
portion out. Just mute me the entire time. That'd be fine.
Yeah, Stan's an asshole. So my
well,
mic's
and
over
so
here.
no, I'll add in to what Sam's saying. I think absolutely correct. The intriguing piece about San Antonio, the market. You know, a lot of people, our politicians, elected leaders, have talked about for years. San Antonio looks like what the United States will look like in 25 or 50 years. Some of that's demographic composition. You think about, I don't know if we're 62% or we've gone up from there on Hispanics, and then you dive into that demographic. It's not 100%, but a much higher percentage having at least one mobile device per person in a household. And San Antonio is higher than that. And so everything from marketers to content creators, I'm not in that space formally, but it's factually, San Antonio is this massive market for that. And so when you transfer that to esports, and maybe it's not the competitive side of esports that's going on in mobile right now, but just gaming on the phone, there's this massive target market that may not have a PC at home, that may not have an iPad at home, that definitely probably doesn't have a console at home, but what they do have is a mobile phone. And so we've heard it through some of the research we've looked at that, you know, San Antonio may be top 3 of the top 50 metros in the United States in terms of mobile devices, mobile games downloaded, and that data is not broken up. So that could be Candy Crush too. But I still believe that it adds to the theory. I mean, Stefanie, your point about entrepreneurs that may be looking to get in the space, I think there's a sizable market in San Antonio that could be tapped through that avenue. We'll see what happens to the broader esports scene in that space, but I think it's an interesting play for San Antonio because the one thing all these kids have, you saw during COVID with the Wi-Fi hotspot stations, most of them aren't taking a laptop out there, they're taking their phone out there. And so that's intriguing to see where it goes.
Yeah, Sam, be a little more inclusive, you elitist.
Whoa, first of all,
no, Sam was coming from the esports side. I was coming more from the business opportunity side.
Just let me pick on Sam. He needs it.
No, I referenced that conversation in the very beginning. Are we talking about mobile esports? Or are we talking about mobile gaming? How dare you?
Well, I mean, I think
Professor
we kind of
Yang,
talked about that a
take
bit
care
too.
of my light work.
I'm kidding. He's like, I'm not amused.
He probably muted me. Travis, can you hear me?
Mm.
Oh, okay, just making sure.
Yeah, he just doesn't want to talk to you. I mean,
Denver, stop.
I can give you a couple reasons. Lucky. And Jesus is on your side. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. Do we have any final thoughts from the Mastermind crew here on esports in San Antonio?
Like and retweet for Tamusa. At
Second
Talusa
that.
_ esports, I think. Is that right?
Yes, I assume that we are going to have like handles and emails and all that good stuff included somewhere in here.
Okay.
So please, if you are trying to help support the esports community and what we're doing as far as education and being activists in the area, please email us if you have any questions, or retweet us if you're trying to support us. And if you really want to support a business, you have the port, and you also have LFG here. So by all means, they have great infrastructure if you don't have it at home. And if you are trying to get into the business scene, everybody here would be happy to talk to you about those sorts of things. So hopefully this was useful. And again, you'll have our information. So thanks for joining us for the talk, and best of luck to anybody trying to get into esports.